She set down the ledger she had balanced for 7 years, folded her napkin into a perfect square, and stood without a single tear. Across the table, her husband had just told a room full of guests that any educated woman could do her work, that she meant nothing he couldn't replace by supper. Abigail Carter did not shout. She simply decided she was done being useful to a man who never once saw her. If you love a story of a woman who walks away and makes them all regret it, subscribe and stay with me to the very end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The house was already breathing when Abigail Carter came down the back stair, and it was breathing because she had taught it how. She heard the kitchen before she reached it, the low crackle of the fire being coaxed back to life, the clatter of the copper pot that always stuck to the hook, the small voice of the youngest kitchen girl asking a question she hadn't yet learned the answer to. Abigail knew that voice. She knew every voice in Carter Manor, the way a woman knows the sound of her own front gate in the dark. "You're up before the birds again, ma'am," said Hollis the cook without turning from the hearth. "The birds keep their own hours," Abigail said. "I keep everyone else's." Hollis snorted. "Ain't that the truth of it?" The Vandermeer flour came short by 2 sacks. Abigail was already at the long table, already turning the pages of the account book she carried under her arm, like some women carried scripture. "Did you weigh it, or did you take his boy's word?" "Took the boy's word, God forgive me." "Don't take a Vandermeer boy's word for the weather, let alone flour." She made a small mark. "I'll write to the mill. We'll have it corrected by Thursday, and will not pay for what we didn't receive. Now the tenants on the north field sent word." Hollis finally turned, wiping her hands. Young Mrs. Poole's fever broke. Something in Abigail's shoulders eased that no one but Hollis would have noticed. "Good. Send her the broth and the good bread, not the day old. And a jar of the honey." "That's the last of the honey, ma'am." "Then it's the last of the honey. A sick woman with 3 children gets the honey before this house gets a sweet with its tea." She closed the book. "See that it goes." This was the hour no one else in the family knew existed. The hour before the manor pretended to run itself. For 7 summers, Abigail had been awake in it, moving through the dark corridors of a house that everyone believed simply worked as though bread rose on its own, as though wages counted themselves, as though the roof over 40 souls had never once needed a woman to argue with a slate man in the rain. Everyone believed she kept the house. No one had ever once considered that she kept the estate alive. She was still turning that thought over, small and quiet, when the steward found her in the front hall. "Mrs. Carter." Elias was a good man, gray at the temples, honest as a Sunday. He held a leather folder against his chest, the way a man holds bad news. "The charity accounts. You asked me to bring you anything that looked wrong. And I don't rightly know that it's wrong." He handed it over. "But I know it ain't right." Abigail opened the folder. She read the way she did everything fast, then again slow. Her thumb stopped on a receipt near the bottom, a disbursement from the estate's charity fund, the fund that fed widows through the hard months and kept the parish school in candles and shoes. $40. A signature at the base. R. Langford. "Who authorized this?" "That's what I can't tell you, ma'am. It's got Mr. Carter's seal, but I never carried it to him for signing, and I carry everything to him myself." "Then how did it get his seal?" Elias looked at his boots. "I don't know, and there's 3 more like it, different months, same name at the bottom." Abigail did not raise her voice. She had learned long ago that a woman who raised her voice was a woman who could be dismissed as hysterical, and a woman who lowered it was a woman men strained to hear. "Say nothing of this to anyone, not the family, not the guests, especially not the guests." "You think it's—" "I think," she said, "that money does not walk out of a locked ledger on its own 2 feet. Someone carried it. Bring me the last 3 years of charity disbursements before noon. And Elias—" She caught his sleeve gently. "You did right to bring me this. You always do right." He flushed, an old man pleased like a boy. "Somebody's got to keep the books honest, ma'am." "Somebody does," she agreed. "It's a shame it's only ever the 2 of us." Nathaniel Carter came down at 7:30, dressed as though the day already owed him something, and it usually did. He was a big man who had learned to move quietly, a habit from his militia years he had never shaken. He nodded to the servants who nodded to him. He did not know their names. He had never needed to. Names were his wife's department. The way flour and fevers and honey were his wife's department. The way everything soft and human in that house was somehow invisibly his wife's department. "Good morning," he said to Abigail, who stood at the window with 3 years of accounts open on the sill. "Nathaniel, I need a quarter hour of your time before breakfast." "After breakfast." "Before. It's the charity fund. There are disbursements I can't account for. Richard Langford's name is on 4 of them." Nathaniel's face did the thing it always did when she brought him something that was not simple. It smoothed like a lake going flat before a storm nobody would admit was coming. "Langford is Victoria's brother. He handles some of the merchant contracts. If his name is on a receipt, there's a reason for it. The reason should be in the ledger. It isn't. And your seal is on paper you never signed. Abigail." He said her name the way a man says enough, without wanting to seem cruel about it. "Victoria's family has been guests in this house for a month. Her brother has done us good service on the river contracts. I will not insult them chasing shadows in a charity account that comes to what, $40? $160, across 4 receipts, and it's not the sum, it's the principle. I know. It's always the principle with you." He almost smiled, and that was worse than if he'd shouted. "You'd tear the whole house down over a principle worth $160. "I'd tear it down over a man forging your name," she said quietly. "But you'd rather I didn't notice." For one moment, just one, something flickered behind his eyes that might have been the man she'd married. Then Victoria Langford came down the stairs, and it was gone. Victoria Langford entered a room the way sunlight comes through a good window. So pleasant, you forgot to ask why it was warming that particular corner and not another. She was young and widowed and beautiful in a way that made older women protective and younger men foolish. She had been a guest at Carter Manor for a month, and in that month she had learned every servant's name. That Nathaniel had never bothered to learn, and she used them, and the servants loved her for it, and Abigail had watched all of this with the still careful attention of a woman watching weather come in off the river. "Am I late?" Victoria asked, though she was never late. "You all look so serious. Have I interrupted a war council?" "My wife has discovered a conspiracy in the charity fund," Nathaniel said, and he said it lightly, the way you'd tell an amusing thing about a child. Abigail did not flinch. She had trained herself out of flinching years ago. "Oh, how thrilling." Victoria pressed a hand to her breast. "A conspiracy. Mrs. Carter, you must tell me everything. I do so admire a woman who understands numbers. I never could. My late husband said I hadn't the head for it." "Your late husband was mistaken about a great many things, I imagine," Abigail said, and she watched carefully to see how the widow took it. Victoria only laughed a real laugh, warm, disarming. "He was at that. Come, let's not talk of ledgers before we've even had our tea. Nathaniel, your wife works harder than any 3 men I've ever met. You ought to make her rest." "She'll not rest," Nathaniel said. "She wouldn't know how." And there it was again. The thing that had been happening in that house for 7 years so slowly that no one, least of all Abigail, had noticed the exact hour it became unbearable. She was praised the way a plow is praised. A good tool, a reliable instrument. Never once a person who might be tired or lonely or standing at a window at dawn, wondering when her husband had last looked at her and seen a woman instead of a system. 1. Breakfast was where it ended, though it had been ending for a very long time. There were 9 of them at the table, the family 2 Langfords, an old cousin of Nathaniel's named Prudence, who ate like a bird and gossiped like a whole aviary, and a merchant guest named Whitfield, who had come about the river contracts and stayed for the food. The talk turned, as it always did, to money, to the estate, to how well Carter Manor ran. "I'll say this," Whitfield declared, buttering bread he had not earned. "I've dealt with a dozen estates up and down this valley, Carter, and there's not one runs cleaner than yours. Your books are a marvel. Your suppliers are paid to the day. Your tenants don't complain. How do you do it?" Nathaniel leaned back. "Discipline," he said. "A well-run house is a matter of discipline. You set the standard, and you hold to it." Abigail's hand went still on her cup. She had written every one of those books. She had fought every one of those suppliers. She had sat at the bedside of tenants and buried 3 of them, and stood up their widows, and never once had Nathaniel Carter set foot in a birthing room, or a death room, or a supplier's back office where the real war of an estate was fought. Discipline, he'd said, as though the house ran on his will and not her hours. "You must have a very fine steward," Whitfield said. "Elias is adequate. And Mrs. Carter, of course," said the old cousin Prudence in the vague way she had. "She keeps the house." "She keeps the house," Nathaniel agreed. And Victoria, laughing, warm, wanting Abigail, would later understand to be helpful in the only way she knew how, which was to make the powerful man at the table feel powerful. Victoria said the thing that lit the fuse. "Oh, but any capable woman can keep a house," she said gaily. "That's the beauty of a well-ordered life, isn't it? A capable woman can always be replaced. It's the man who sets the standard who can't be. Isn't that so, Nathaniel?" The table laughed. It was a joke. It was meant as a compliment to him. And Nathaniel Carter, wealthiest landowner on that stretch of the Hudson, former militia officer respected by every man in the county. Nathaniel Carter, who had a chance in that half-second to look at his wife and say, "No, she is not to be replaced. She is the reason all of you are eating." "Nathaniel." Carter smiled and reached for his coffee and said, "Any educated woman could perform Abigail's duties." The room did not go silent for anyone but her. For the rest of them, the talk rolled right on. Prudence said something about educated women. Whitfield laughed. Victoria's smile faltered just slightly because even she, even the woman who had thrown the match, had not expected him to strike it. Only Victoria seemed to feel the temperature of the room change, and she looked quickly at Abigail and then away. Abigail set down her cup. She did not cry. That surprised her later, when she had time to be surprised by things. 7 years of a marriage, and the thing that broke it made no more sound than a cup on a saucer. She reached for her napkin. She folded it once, twice into a neat square and set it beside her plate, the way she had set everything in that house into its neat and useful place for 7 years. "You're quite right," she said. Nathaniel glanced at her mildly. "Right about what? That any educated woman could do my work." Her voice was perfectly even. "I've often thought so myself. It's simple work, really. Anyone could learn it. I wonder that it took me 7 years to see how little it mattered." "Abigail." "I'm not upset, Nathaniel." And the terrible thing was that she wasn't not in any way he could recognize. A woman gets upset over a thing she still hopes to change. I stopped hoping some time ago. I only just now noticed. Prudence had gone quiet. Whitfield had discovered a great interest in his eggs. "Sit down," Nathaniel said. "You're making a scene." "I'm sitting perfectly still. You're the one who's about to make a scene in front of your guests over a napkin." She rose. "Excuse me, I find I have duties, or I did. It seems they belong to anyone now." No. She went up to her rooms, and she did not slam the door, because a slammed door is a door you mean to open again. Instead, she pulled her trunk from the closet, the good one, the one she'd brought from her father's house as a bride, with her whole educated head full of a marriage that would be a partnership. She set it on the bed, and she opened it, and she began with the same calm efficiency she brought to everything to fold her life into it. The maid Susan appeared in the doorway with her mouth open. "Ma'am." "Close the door, Susan." Susan closed it. Susan stood against it as though holding out the whole house. "Ma'am, you can't." "I can, actually. That's rather the point I've just been making downstairs." Abigail folded a shawl. "It turns out I'm quite replaceable. That being so, there's no reason for me to stay." He didn't mean it. "Men say all sorts of foolishness at breakfast, ma'am, my own father." "Susan." Abigail stopped and looked at her, and her voice went gentle in a way that was harder to bear than anger. "How old were you when you came to this house?" 14, ma'am." And who taught you your letters so you could read your mother's Bible? Susan's chin trembled. You did. And who sat up with you the winter you had the lung fever when they said you might not last till spring? You did, ma'am. Was that keeping the house? Abigail folded another thing. Was that the work any educated woman could do? Susan began to cry quietly, the way people cry in houses where crying loudly has never once helped. Don't, Abigail said. Don't, or you'll set me off, and I've decided I'm not going to give this house a single tear. It doesn't deserve them. It never noticed the ones I've already spent. She reached out and touched the girl's cheek. You've been a good girl. You'll be all right. You'll all be all right. That's what he thinks, isn't it? That you'll all just carry on. There was a knock. Not Nathaniel's knock. Softer. Mrs. Carter? Victoria's voice. May I come in? Abigail and Susan looked at each other. Then Abigail said, You may. Victoria came in and shut the door and stood with her hands folded, and for a woman who was never at a loss, she looked for once genuinely lost. I've come to apologize. Have you? What I said. About capable women being replaceable. It was thoughtless. I never meant Mrs. Carter. I would never have said such a thing if I'd known he would. She stopped. He shouldn't have agreed. That was cruel of him. I'm sorry to have given him the chance. And here was the thing Abigail would remember later, when she was trying to work out who in that house was her enemy. Victoria Langford's apology was real. Whatever else the woman was, and Abigail's every instinct honed on years of watching was whispering. There is something wrong here. Watch her. Watch her brother. Watch the money. The apology in that moment was not a lie. Victoria had thrown a match to warm a rich man's vanity. She had not expected the man to burn his own house down with it. You've nothing to apologize for, Abigail said. You told the truth as this family sees it. He only confirmed it. I'm grateful to you, in fact. I might have gone another 7 years not knowing. You're leaving. It wasn't a question. I'm leaving. He'll come after you. Men like Nathaniel when they lose a thing they thought was theirs to keep. He hasn't lost me. You can't lose a thing you never knew you had. Abigail closed the trunk and worked the latch. He's lost his steward, his bookkeeper, his housekeeper, his nurse, and the woman who's kept his name clean up and down this valley for 7 years. That's what he's lost. He just doesn't know it's all been one person. Victoria was quiet. Then so low Abigail almost missed it. You should look at the charity accounts before you go. Abigail's hands went still on the latch. What did you say? But Victoria had already turned, already opened the door, already become again the warm and pleasant woman who came into rooms like sunlight. Nothing, she said. Only travel safely, Mrs. Carter. Whatever you decide, I hope it takes you somewhere you're seen. And she was gone, and Abigail stood there holding her trunk and thought she knows something. She's afraid of something, and she's just told me in the only way she dares to keep looking. Nathaniel was waiting in the front hall. He had positioned himself the way a man positions himself when he expects to win feet-planted hands behind his back, the whole architecture of a man who has never once had a person walk out of his life and did not believe it was possible now. This is absurd, he said. Put the trunk down. Move aside, Nathaniel. Abigail, you are my wife. You will not walk out of this house over a remark at breakfast. I'm not walking out over a remark. She set the trunk down, not because he'd told her to, but because it was heavy and she wanted her hands free for this. I'm walking out over 7 years, of which the remark was simply the truest thing anyone said out loud. You didn't insult me this morning. You described me. That's what's undone it. You weren't being cruel. You were being honest. To you, I am a set of duties, and a set of duties can pack itself into a trunk and go. Where will you even go? To Albany, to my aunt. She watched his face. You didn't know I had an aunt in Albany, did you? Ellen, my mother's sister. She's written me every month for 7 years, and you've never once asked who the letters were from. He didn't answer because there was no answer. There's something wrong in the charity fund. she said, changing tack so fast she watched him stumble to follow. 4 disbursements with Richard Langford's name and your seal on paper you never signed. I told you this an hour ago. You told me it was shadows. Nathaniel, I am begging you, as the last useful thing I do in this house, read the ledgers, the real ones. Elias has them. Someone is stealing from the widow's fund, and they are using your name to do it, and when it comes out, and it will come out, it will be your name in the papers, not mine, because you are the one who signed. I didn't sign anything. I know, that's the point. That's the whole point. You didn't sign, and yet there's your seal. Ask yourself who in this house can reach your seal. She let that sit. I've spent 7 years reading everything so you wouldn't have to. Please. Just this once. Read it yourself. For a moment, a real moment, the longest they'd shared in years, she saw him almost do it. She saw the militia officer in him, the man who had once been able to read a battlefield turn and look at the thing she was showing him. Then his pride closed over it, like the lake going flat. I'll not have my household guests investigated on the word of a woman who's leaving me in a temper, he said. When you've calmed yourself, you'll see how you've overreacted. Come home in a week and we'll speak no more of it. Abigail picked up her trunk. That's the difference between us, Nathaniel, she said. You think I'll come home in a week. She stepped past him toward the door, and he didn't stop her because it had genuinely not occurred to him that a thing he owned could simply leave. I know you'll spend a great deal longer than a week wishing I would. The cart was already at the door because Elias, God bless his honest gray head, had ordered it the moment he'd seen her face at breakfast. The servants had gathered, not called, not summoned, just there, the way people are there for a thing that matters. Hollis with flowers still on her apron. Susan with her red eyes. 2 stable boys. The girl who'd asked the question in the kitchen that morning that hadn't yet learned its answer. Abigail stopped on the step. She had meant to leave without a word. She found she couldn't. The pool woman gets the honey through the fever, she said to Hollis. The Vandermeer flour is short 2 sacks. Don't pay till it's corrected. The parish shoes are due before the school opens, and the money's set aside in the 3rd drawer, and the key is where it always is. Her voice caught once, and she mastered it. You know all of it. You've watched me do it 1,000 times. You don't need me. None of you ever needed me. You only needed someone to remember. So remember. Remember it all. Because he certainly won't. Hollis wiped her eyes with the back of a floury hand. Ain't right, ma'am. No, Abigail agreed. It ain't. But right and true are 2 different animals. Hollis, and I've made my peace with the true one. She climbed into the cart. Take care of each other. And when the house starts to come apart, and it will faster than any of you can guess, don't any of you take the blame for it. It won't be your doing. It'll be his. Elias took the reins. Where to, Mrs. Carter? She looked back once at Carter Manor. At the great clean windows she'd argued a slate man into replacing. At the door she'd painted the color her mother-in-law had hated and been right about. At the whole enormous machine of a house that ran, that everyone believed ran itself, that was even now, though none of them yet knew it, drawing its last few easy breaths. Nathaniel stood in the doorway. He did not call out. A man does not call out to a thing he believes will return of its own accord. Albany, Abigail said. And Elias? Ma'am. Drive slow past the parish. I want to see the widows one more time. She faced forward. I've a feeling I'm about to become one of the things this valley talks about. I'd like to remember what it looked like when I was still the woman who fed them. The cart pulled away. Behind her, the house stood exactly as it always had, and to any eye passing on the river road, it looked as sound and settled as it had for 100 years. But Abigail Carter knew houses. She knew this one better than the man whose name it bore. And she knew that a house does not fall on the day the beam breaks. It falls on the day the one person who'd been holding the beam up finally quietly set down her end of it and walked out into a summer morning to find out at long last what she was worth to anyone besides a rich man's ledger. She did not look back a second time. She had already looked back enough for one lifetime, The house made it 3 days before it began to die. Nathaniel Carter did not notice the first day. A man does not notice the first day of anything he believes will pass. He rose at 7:30, dressed as though the day owed him something, and came down to a breakfast that was 10 minutes late and cold in the middle, and he frowned at it and said nothing, because a man of discipline does not complain about 10 minutes. He noticed the second day. "Where is my correspondence?" he asked Elias in the front hall. "Sir, the letters. Every morning there's a stack of letters on my desk, sorted the urgent ones on top. Where are they?" Elias, who had spent 30 years learning when to speak and when to swallow, chose to swallow first. "Mrs. Carter sorted the correspondence, sir." "Then who sorts it now?" "No one, sir. There's no one to—" Elias stopped. "There's a great deal of it, sir. It's in the study. All of it. Unopened." Nathaniel went to the study. He had not been in it much. It was where the estate's business was done, and the estate's business had done itself for 7 years. He opened the door and stopped. The desk was buried, not with the neat stacks he half remembered seeing when he passed, with a landslide. Letters from suppliers, letters from tenants, letters bearing the parish seal, the mills seal, the seal of 2 banks in Albany, and 1 in New York. A month of them, perhaps more, opened and answered and filed away every morning of his life by a woman he had told a room full of guests was replaceable. He picked up the top one. A demand from Vandermeer's mill for payment on flour-delivered flour. Nathaniel did not know that had been 2 sacks short and never should have been paid for at all. He set it down. "Elias." "Sir." "Answer these." "Sir, I keep the book, sir. I don't answer the correspondence. I never have. Mrs. Carter." And there it was again, that name arriving in every sentence, like a bill coming due. Mrs. Carter answered the correspondence. "I couldn't tell you which of these is urgent and which can wait." She knew. She had it all in her head, sir. She'd read a letter and know in a breath whether it was a threat or a nuisance or a chance to save us $50. "I never learned it because I never had to." "Then learn it now." "Sir." Elias's voice was very quiet. "There's 40 years of me learning that a steward keeps the books and the mistress keeps the house. If you'd like me to learn her work in an afternoon, I'll try. But I'll do it badly, and it'll cost you, and I'd not be honest if I let you believe otherwise." Nathaniel looked at the landslide of paper. "She'll be back within the week," he said, and it came out with less certainty than it had 3 days before. By the 5th day the tenants came. Not 1. 6. 6 men off the north and east fields, hats in their hands, standing in the yard in the July heat, because the man who owned the ground they farmed had never once in 7 years invited a tenant to stand indoors. Nathaniel came out to them. "What's this?" The oldest of them, a hard-handed man named Corliss, spoke for the rest. "Beg pardon, Mr. Carter. We've come about the well repair, and the fence on the south line, and Mrs. Poole's rent, which Mrs. Carter forgave for the summer on account of the fever, and now Mr. Elias says there's nothing wrote down that she was forgave it, and the collectors come round asking, and Mrs. Poole's near frightened to death she'll lose the roof over her young ones. There's nothing written down. No, sir. Mrs. Carter, she'd tell a body. Her word was the writing. Everybody knew her word held." Corliss turned his hat in his hands. "We didn't come to make trouble, sir. We come because there's nobody now to tell things to. We'd tell the missus. The missus ain't here. And a man don't like to bring his troubles to—" He stopped himself. "To me," Nathaniel finished. Corliss said nothing which was its own kind of answer. "The rent is forgiven," Nathaniel said. "Elias will write it down. The well and the fence will be seen to." "Thank you, sir. There's just—" Corliss hesitated. "There's the matter of who sees to it. Mrs. Carter, she'd send the Dutchman, the good one, not his brother. His brother does poor work and charges the same. We don't know which is which, sir. Only she knew which is which." Nathaniel stood in his own yard, a former militia officer who had once commanded 100 men across the frozen Champlain country, and he found he could not tell one Dutchman from another, and that this ignorance had a cost, and that the cost had been paid silently every day for 7 years by the woman folding her napkin at his breakfast table. "Send whichever one comes first," he said, and knew as he said it that it was the wrong answer. The rumor reached him on the 6th day, and the rumor did not come from a tenant or a servant. It came from society, which is to say it came from Victoria Langford, though she was careful to make it seem it came from the air. "You mustn't mind what people are saying," she told him at supper, a supper of overcooked mutton, and a soup that had come out wrong because Hollis was a fine cook of plain food, but had always taken the week's menu from a mistress who was no longer there to give it. "What are people saying?" "Oh." Victoria touched her lips as though she wished she hadn't spoken. "Nothing. It's cruel. I'd never repeat it." "Victoria." She set down her spoon with an air of reluctant duty. "They're saying Mrs. Carter has had a nervous collapse, that the strain of the household broke her health, poor thing, and she's gone to Albany to recover her mind. Mrs. Whitfield had it from the Van Rensselaers, and the Van Rensselaers had it from Well. It's everywhere by now. All of Columbia County thinks your wife has lost her reason." Nathaniel set down his own spoon very slowly. "That is a lie." "Of course it's a lie. I know it and you know it, but you know how it is." Her voice was full of sympathy, and Nathaniel, who was not a stupid man, only a proud one, only a man who had never had to look closely at anything, soft, did not hear the thing underneath the sympathy, the small, satisfied thing, quiet as a cat. "A woman who leaves her husband's house must have a reason the county can understand. Either she's mad, or she's wicked, or she's been wronged. And no one likes to think a man like you would wrong his wife. So, the kindest story, the kindest, is that she's simply unwell. And the unkind story—" Victoria lowered her eyes. "I'd never repeat the unkind story." "Repeat it." "That she's been managing the accounts for years, and that something in the accounts has gone wrong, and that she's fled before it could be discovered." Victoria looked up all wide-eyed distress. "Which is absurd. Anyone can see she's the honest sort. Isn't she? I'm sure she is." And Nathaniel, who 3 days before would have said his wife was as honest as a Sunday, and not thought twice, felt for the first time a small, cold worm of doubt turn over in his chest, planted there so gently, so kindly, that he never once suspected the hand that had planted it. "She's honest," he said, but he said it a half-second too slow. Victoria saw the half-second. She smiled into her wine. In Albany, Abigail Carter was not recovering her mind. She was using it. Her Aunt Ellen kept a narrow, spotless house on a hill above the river, the house of a widow who'd been left comfortable and asked nothing of anyone, and she had taken her niece in with 2 questions and no fuss. The first question was, "Are you hurt?" "No." The second was, "Are you leaving him or leaving him for a while?" Abigail had thought about that one. "I don't know yet. I know I'm not going back to being what I was." "Good enough," said Ellen, and put the kettle on, and that was the whole of it. For 3 days Abigail did nothing but sleep, which she had not properly done in years. And on the 4th day she woke before dawn out of pure habit, and lay in the strange bed with nothing to organize and no house breathing beneath her. And she wept finally in Albany, in a bed that owed her nothing for about 10 minutes, and then she got up and did the thing she had come to Albany to do. She had brought the copies. For 7 years, Abigail had kept a private book, not the estate ledger that stayed at the manor. Her own book in her own hand, a copy of every account she managed, made each night by candle after the house was asleep, because a woman who is trusted with everything and owns nothing learns if she is wise to keep a record of her own. She had never told Nathaniel it existed. She had told herself she kept it for accuracy. She understood now she had kept it for exactly this. She spread the copies on her aunt's kitchen table, and she began to read the charity fund, the way she'd read the folder Elias handed her a week and a life ago, fast, then slow. And the second time through slow, she found it. It was not 4 disbursements. It was 11. 4 had crossed Elias's honest desk. 7 had not. 7 had simply appeared in the fund's outgoing column and vanished into the world, each one carrying Richard Langford's name and Nathaniel's seal spread across 3 years. Always in the summer, always small enough to escape a careless eye. $40, 60, 90. But never so small they didn't add up. She added them up. $490 had walked out of the widow's fund while she'd sat 2 rooms away balancing everything else in the house and never known. Her hand was steady when she wrote the number down. It was her heart that wasn't, because $490 was not a rich man's carelessness. $490 stolen a little at a time from the mouths of widows was a plan. And a plan meant a planner. And a planner meant that somewhere in the warm and pleasant weather of Victoria Langford's month at Carter Manor, someone had been very patiently robbing the poorest people in the county and using her husband's name and her honest steward's fund to do it. "Aunt Ellen," she said, "I need to write some letters." "To your husband?" "No." Abigail dipped her pen. "To the Albany bank that holds the charity account, and to the parish, and to a lawyer, if you know an honest one." Ellen, drying a cup, considered this. "I know one. Samuel Pierce. He handled my late husband's affairs and never once tried to cheat a widow, which in my experience makes him rarer than a 2-headed calf." She set the cup down. "You're not recovering your mind, are you, Abigail?" "No, Aunt Ellen." "You're going to war." Abigail's pen didn't stop. "I'm going to do the thing I've done every day for 7 years, she said. "I'm going to read what nobody else will bother to read and find the truth in it and set it right. The only difference is that this time, when I set it right, my name is going on it." At Carter Manor, the truth was arriving too, but slower, and to a man far less prepared to receive it. Nathaniel could not sleep. This was new. He was a man who had slept soundly through militia winters, through the death of his father, through 7 years of a marriage he'd thought was fine. Now he lay awake in a house that made wrong sounds, a house that creaked in the settling way of a place where nobody had gone round at night, checking the windows, banking the fires, doing the 100 small quiet things that a house needs and never asks for aloud. On the 9th night, he gave up on sleep and went down to the study, and he lit a lamp, and he looked at the landslide of paper, and he did the thing his wife had begged him to do on the morning she left. He read the ledgers. Not the correspondence he still couldn't have told an urgent letter from a nuisance, but the ledgers were numbers and numbers a militia officer could read. He read the estate accounts front to back, and what he found undid him in a way the empty side of the bed had not. He found her. Every page was her. Not her name. She never signed the estate ledger that was Elias's book to keep, but her hand was on all of it in the marginal notes, the corrections, the small pencil marks. "Do not pay till corrected." Widow Poole rent forgiven summer sea charity. Vandermeer short wait again, 3rd time right mill. Susan's wages advanced for boots, deduct nothing. Girl needs boots. Page after page of a woman running an empire out of the margins of a book that bore another man's name, saving him money. He never knew he'd nearly lost, protecting people he'd never known were at risk, and asking in 7 years for not one word of credit. He turned to the charity fund. And there in the margin beside a disbursement he had never authorized, in his wife's small, precise hand, dated 10 days before she left R. Langford. No supporting order. Seal used without my knowledge. Raised with N. He will not hear it. He will not hear it. Nathaniel Carter sat alone in his study at 2 a.m. and read in his wife's own writing the record of the moment she had tried to save him and he had refused to be saved. She had known. She had known for days, weeks longer. She had written it down. She had brought it to him. She had begged him at his own front door. "Read the ledgers. Someone is stealing from the widows and using your name," and he had told her it was shadows. He had told her she overreacted. He had told her to come home in a week, and she had said the last true thing she'd say to him. "You think I'll come home in a week? I know you'll spend a great deal longer wishing I would." He put his head in his hands. He did not weep because he did not know how. It had never once been asked of him. But he sat there a long time in the wrong-sounding house, and somewhere in that long time, the pride that had closed over the truth, like a lake going flat, finally quietly cracked. Tunt. In the morning, he sent for Elias before breakfast. "The charity fund," Nathaniel said. "I want every disbursement for 3 years, every one. And I want to know which of them crossed your desk and which did not." Elias's gray face did a complicated thing, relief and dread braided together. "Mrs. Carter asked me the same, sir, the morning she left." "I know. I'm asking it now because I should have let her ask it then." Nathaniel's voice was rough. "How many, Elias? How many disbursements did you never carry to me for signing?" Elias had already been dreading the question long enough to have the answer. "4 that I know of, sir, but—" He hesitated. But I only see what comes across my desk. The fund's kept at the bank in Albany, and any order with your seal on it, the bank will honor whether it comes through me or not. If someone had your seal, sir, they could send orders straight to the bank, and I'd never see them at all. There could be 4. There could be 40. He swallowed. "Mrs. Carter, she kept her own copy of everything. Every night. I used to see her lamp. She'd have caught the ones I never saw. She always caught everything. She kept her own copy." "Yes, sir, in her own hand." And Nathaniel understood all at once that the only complete record of the crime committed under his roof, in his name against the widows of his own parish, was in the possession of the woman he had told a room full of guests was replaceable, and that she was 60 miles away in Albany, and that he had given her no reason on earth to share it with him. "Who can reach my seal, Elias?" Elias looked at his boots. "Sir, you keep it in the study, in the locked drawer. But the key hangs in the hall. It always has. Anybody in the house who knew where to look, any guest who'd been here long enough to watch." He said it very carefully. "Any guest, sir, who'd made friends with the servants, who knew their names, who they'd have thought nothing of coming and going." The 2 men looked at each other, and neither of them said the name, because the woman it belonged to was at that moment coming down the stairs calling brightly to the housemaid by name, warm as sunlight through a good window. That same morning in Albany, Samuel Pierce came to call. He was a small, dry, precise man with ink on his fingers and no wife married. Instead to the law, and he sat at Ellen's kitchen table and read Abigail's private copies with the same speed she had fast, then slow. And when he'd finished the slow reading, he took off his spectacles and looked at her. "Mrs. Carter, do you understand what you have here? I understand that $490 was stolen from a charity fund over 3 years using my husband's name. You have more than that." Pierce tapped the pages. "You have it dated. You have it in a contemporaneous hand written at the time, not after. You have marginal notes proving you raised the matter and were ignored. A private book kept nightly matching the official ledger to the penny, except in exactly these 11 places. Mrs. Carter, in 20 years of law, I have rarely seen a record so clean it convicts a man on sight." He put his spectacles back on. "The trouble is, who it convicts. Richard Langford. His name's on the paper, but his name being on the paper is precisely what a clever man would arrange if he wished someone else to hang for his theft." Pierce steepled his fingers. "Whose seal, Mrs. Carter?" Abigail went very still. "My husband's." "Your husband's seal, your husband's fund, your husband's name at the head of every account. And your husband, if I understand you, refused to investigate when you raised it, refused twice, once at his desk and once at his own front door before witnesses." Pierce let that sit. "Now, I believe you when you say your husband is innocent. But I have watched juries. Mrs. Carter and I will tell you what a jury sees. A jury sees a wealthy man whose charity fund was robbed under his own seal, who refused to look into it, and whose wife fled the house the same week the theft was to be uncovered. A jury does not see the truth. A jury sees a story, and the story that hangs together best is not the true one." The kitchen was quiet. Ellen had stopped drying dishes. "You're telling me," Abigail said slowly, "that the evidence I gathered to prove someone was stealing in my husband's name is the same evidence that could send your husband to prison for it?" "Yes." Pierce nodded. "Or you. You kept the books. You held the pen. A truly clever adversary would be delighted to see you produce this. It puts the crime in your handwriting, Mrs. Carter, in the sense that you're the one who documented it. Turn it the right way, and you're the heroine who caught a thief. Turn it the wrong way, and you're the bookkeeper who recorded her own embezzlement and then ran. Abigail sat with that. It was a colder feeling than the one she'd had reading the 11 disbursements. She had walked out of Carter Manor believing she carried the truth in her trunk like a weapon. She understood now she carried something more dangerous, a truth that could cut whichever way the hand that held it was turned, and that there were hands in that house very practiced at turning things. Then what do I do? You do not act alone, and you do not act loud. Pierce began gathering the pages, squaring their edges. We do not go to the bank yet. We do not go to the parish yet. We say nothing to your husband, forgive me, but a man who won't hear a warning is a man who will blunder into the trap trying to defend you. We watch, we wait. We let the thief keep believing no one is reading. Because the one advantage you have, Mrs. Carter, is the one advantage you've always had. He looked at her over his spectacles. You read what no one thinks you're reading. Let them go on thinking it. The next time a dollar walks out of that fund, we'll have the bank's record, and your record, and a witness to match them, and then we'll know whose hand is really on the seal. That could take weeks. It could. Are you in a hurry to go home? Abigail thought of the wrong-sounding house 60 miles south, of the man who'd told her she was replaceable and would by now be discovering hour by hour how wrong that was. She found she was not, in fact, in a hurry. No, she said. Let them think I've lost my mind. Let them think I've run. Let them think whatever's easiest. She squared her own shoulders. I've spent 7 years being invisible, Mr. Pierce. It turns out I'm very good at it. Let's find out what a thief does when he believes the only person who could catch him has gone quietly away. The thief at that hour was doing what thieves do when they believe they've won. He was getting greedy. Richard Langford arrived at Carter Manor that afternoon unannounced, which he'd never dared before arriving now, with the ease of a man who feels the ground beneath a house shifting in his favor. He was heavier than his sister, softer with a merchant's smile and a debtor's eyes, and he came to Nathaniel's study with a leather folder of his own. Carter, I won't keep you. I know these are difficult days. He said difficult days the way Victoria said, nervous collapse gently, with just enough sympathy to make a proud man flinch. I've brought the river contracts, the ones we discussed. Whitfield's ready to sign, but he wants your seal on the estate's guarantee before he'll commit the capital. It's a formality, time-sensitive though. He'll walk if we dither. Nathaniel looked in the folder. Then he looked at Richard Langford. And for the first time, he looked at him the way his wife would have, slow, then slower. Your name is on 4 disbursements from the charity fund, Nathaniel said, for which there is no supporting order. The merchant's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes did a small door closing. The charity fund? Good heavens, I couldn't tell you. Your wife managed all that, didn't she? Perhaps she made an error. God knows the poor woman's been under strain. He set the folder on the desk. You oughtn't trouble yourself with figures now, Carter. Not with everything else you're carrying. Sign the guarantee, let Whitfield's capital come in, and let the small things wait for calmer days. Sign the guarantee. Nathaniel looked at the paper Langford wanted his seal on. He thought of 11 margins in his wife's small hand. He thought of, he will not hear it. He thought with a clarity that came to him too late to have saved his marriage, but perhaps not too late to save something that a man who wanted your seal this badly on this day, with this much sympathy in his voice, was not a man doing you a favor. Leave it with me, Nathaniel said. I'll read it. There's not much time. I'll read it, Langford. His voice had the militia in it now, the officer who'd once commanded men across the ice. I've lately learned the cost of signing things I haven't read. Leave it. I'll send word. Richard Langford left the folder and left the study, and his merchant's smile stayed in place until the door closed behind him, and then it did not. And Nathaniel Carter sat alone with a contract he did not yet understand. A seal he could no longer trust to be his own. A house dying by inches around him, and a wife in Albany who held the only clean record of it all. And he understood finally fully in the marrow of him the thing she had tried to tell him at breakfast, at his desk, at his own front door, and that he had been too proud to hear. She had not kept the house. She had held it up, all of it. The books and the bread and the widows and the walls and his own good name, held up in 2 hands for 7 years, while he called it discipline and took the credit at his own table. And he had told a room full of guests she could be replaced. He picked up his pen. He drew a fresh sheet of paper, and for the first time in the marriage, Nathaniel Carter began slowly and badly, and in his own clumsy hand, to write his wife a letter. Not a summons, not a demand that she come home in a week, but the first honest sentence he had ever addressed to her, which took him 4 attempts, and which read, when he finally let it stand, "Abigail, you were right about the shadows. I have been reading the ledgers. I understand now what I refused to see, and I have no right to ask you for anything. I am asking anyway. Come home not to keep my house, to help me save it before an innocent name is ruined, and I fear the name may be yours." He sealed it with the same seal that had been used to rob the widows, and the wrongness of that struck him as he pressed it into the wax, and he called for a writer and he sent it north toward Albany, toward the woman he had spent 7 years failing to see, with no earthly idea whether she would read it or burn it, or whether it would reach her at all before the thief in his own house finished what he'd so patiently begun. The letter reached Albany on a Tuesday, and Abigail did not burn it. She almost did. She held it a long moment over the kitchen candle, watching the wax seal soften at the edges, the seal she now knew had robbed the widows pressed into the letter that begged her home. The irony of it was almost too much. But her Aunt Ellen, drying the same cup she always dried, said only, "A woman who burns a letter unread spends the rest of her life wondering what it said," and Abigail broke the seal instead. She read it once, then she read it slow, and on the slow reading, she found the thing that made her set it down on the table and press her hand flat over it as though it might blow away. "I understand now what I refused to see, not come home. You've made your point. Not the household is in disarray. I need you." Not one word about the house at all, in fact, except that he feared the name that would be ruined by it might be hers. He had read the ledgers. He had seen her hand in the margins. He had understood finally the exact shape of what she'd carried, and the first use he'd made of understanding was fear for her, not for himself. It undid something in her that she'd spent 9 days carefully tying shut. "Well," said Ellen, "he read the ledgers. And he's frightened for me." Abigail's voice was not quite steady. "Aunt Ellen, in 7 years that man was never frightened for me. He was frightened for the estate and the harvest and his standing in the county, and I was the thing that kept all of it from frightening him. He never once—" She stopped. "He's frightened for me. It took losing me to teach him how." Ellen set down the cup. "So you'll go home?" "No." And Abigail was surprised by how fast the word came and how sure. "One honest letter isn't 7 years, Aunt Ellen. A man who's cruel for 7 years and kind for 1 afternoon has learned nothing but which sentence to write when the house gets cold. I've watched men be sorry before. Sorry is easy. Sorry costs nothing." She folded the letter and put it in her apron, not the fire. "He wants me to come home and help him save the estate. I'll help save the estate, but not by coming home, and not because he asked." She was still saying it when the second thing arrived that Tuesday, and the second thing was not a letter. It was a boy on a lathered horse from the parish, and he'd ridden the 60 miles half to death, and what he brought was word that Elias, old honest gray-headed Elias, who kept the books and swallowed first and always did right, had been found at the foot of the study stairs with his skull cracked, and that the study's locked drawer had been forced, and that Abigail's private ledger, which Elias had been quietly copying to send north to her, was gone. She was on the road within the hour. Not to Carter Manor. Pierce had been firm about that, and even in her fear, she held to it. She rode to the parish, to the small sick room where they'd carried Elias, and she came through the door still in her traveling dust, and the old steward turned his gray head on the pillow, and his eyes found her, and filled. "Mrs. Carter." His voice was a ruin. "You came." Of course I came, don't talk. The doctor said, Doctor says a great many things. A ghost of the old dry humor. I ain't dead yet, ma'am, so let me speak while I've got the speaking in me. His hand found hers, and it was cold, and it frightened her more than the bandage. I was copying your book, the private one. You'd left it in the study desk. I never left it. I took it to Albany. Elias's brow creased. No, ma'am. The one in the study. Your hand. Every night's copy 3 years back, in the locked drawer. And Abigail went cold all the way through because she had taken her private book to Albany. It was in her trunk this very moment, which meant the book in the study drawer, the book someone had cracked an old man's skull to steal, was a book she had never made. Elias, she said carefully, listen to me. I have my book. It's with me. I never kept a second copy in that drawer. Whatever was in there, I didn't put it there. The old man stared at her, and slowly, terribly, the same understanding that was breaking over her broke over him. Then somebody made a book in your hand, he whispered, and put it where I'd find it, and let me copy it, and took it back with my head for the taking. His grip tightened. It weren't the real accounts they wanted stole, ma'am. It was a false one they wanted found, in your writing, so that when the theft comes out, the book that surfaces convicts me. Abigail finished it in a whisper. Pierce's warning came back to her whole. A truly clever adversary would be delighted to see you produce this. It puts the crime in your handwriting. Except they hadn't waited for her to produce anything. They'd forged the crime in her hand themselves, planted it, and were even now no doubt arranging for it to be discovered. Who found you, Elias? Who was in the house? Didn't see. Come up behind me on the stair. His eyes were sliding shut, the effort costing him. But there was talk, ma'am. The Langford man, Richard. He'd been closeted with the master over some contract river guarantee, wanting the master's seal bad, and the master wouldn't sign. Said he'd read it first. A faint, fierce pride. The master's reading things now, ma'am. You taught him that, even gone. Don't talk about the master. Rest. One more. His hand would not let go. The false book. If they've got it, and they cracked my head to keep it, they mean to use it soon. You watch the parish, Mrs. Carter. The charity's got its summer accounting come the quarter day. Public. Whole county reads the fund's books at quarter day. The words were slurring now. That's when they'll spring it. Public accounting. They'll produce your false book before the whole county, and there'll be no time to... He slipped under before he finished, and the doctor moved her gently back, and Abigail stood in the little sick room, with her real ledger 60 miles weight in her memory, and a forged one loose in the world with her name in it, and she understood that the quiet, patient game Pierce had wanted to play, watch and wait, let the thief believe no one is reading, was over. Someone had cracked an honest man's skull. The waiting was done. She sent for Pierce by the same half-dead boy on a fresh horse, and she did the thing Pierce had told her not to do, because Pierce had not counted on a forged book or a broken steward. She went to Carter Manor. She came up the river road she'd left on 9 days before. And the house that had looked so sound and settled to any passing eye now looked to her eye, which knew houses like exactly what it was. The south fence still down. The well still dry-mouthed and idle. A shutter hanging. The yard unswept. 9 days, and the great machine that everyone believed ran itself had ground visibly publicly toward a stop. Nathaniel was in the yard when she came, and he saw the cart, and he came toward it fast, and then made himself stop, made himself stand, because he had learned in 9 days that a man does not run at a thing he wants to keep. Abigail. Her name came out of him like it cost something. You read the letter. I read it. She climbed down without his help, and she watched him not offer it, which was new and which she noted. I'm not here because of the letter. Elias is at the parish with his head cracked open, and someone stole a ledger in my handwriting that I never wrote. And if we don't move faster than they do, one of us is going to prison, and I've decided it isn't going to be me, and I find I'd rather it not be you either, though. God knows you've given me reasons. Whatever Nathaniel had braced himself to hear, it was not that. A ledger you never wrote? Someone forged my hand. 3 years of false accounts planted in your study. made so it would be found. She was already moving toward the house, and he was already following, and there was something in that for once he followed, and she led, and neither of them remarked on it, because both of them felt it. Elias found it. Copied it thinking it was mine. Someone cracked his skull to take it back. And Elias told me before he went under there's a public accounting of the charity fund at quarter day. That's when they mean to produce it, before the whole county. My handwriting, your seal, $490 gone from the widows and a wife who fled the same week. Nathaniel, they've built the story. All they need now is the day. Nathaniel had gone very white. Quarter day is Friday. Abigail stopped walking. Friday. 4 days. He said it like a man counting his own remaining hours. Abigail, I refused to sign Langford's river guarantee. He wanted my seal on it badly, urgently. Whitfield walking if I dithered. I told him I'd read it first. He left it and I read it, and it's not a guarantee, it's a transfer, buried in the language. It signs over the estate's standing surety on the charity account itself. If I'd sealed it, I'd have made Richard Langford the guarantor of the fund he's been robbing, which means when the theft surfaced, the paper would show him trying to make it good and me signing it over, and I'd have handed him the last piece he needed to bury us both and walk away clean. He dragged a hand down his face. I only saw it because I read it slow. Because... He stopped. Because I asked myself what you would have seen. And then I saw it. It was the closest thing to a gift he had ever given her, and it landed in the middle of a catastrophe, and neither of them had time to feel it, but both of them felt it anyway. Samuel Pierce arrived from Albany the next morning, dusty and dry and precise, and he sat at the long table in Carter Manor, the same table where a woman had once folded a napkin into a neat square, and he laid Abigail's real ledger beside the space where the false one should have been, and he laid out the war in 4 days flat. We cannot stop the quarter-day accounting, Pierce said. It's fixed by parish charter. The whole county has the right to attend, and half of it will now that there's scandal in the air. Nor should we want to stop it. If we hide from the public accounting, we look exactly like people with something to hide. No, we let it proceed. But we control what walks into that room. He tapped the real ledger. They have a forged book in Mrs. Carter's hand. We have the true book in Mrs. Carter's hand. 2 books, both claiming to be genuine, both in the same handwriting. On its face, a jury or a parish board cannot tell which is which. Then how do we win? Nathaniel asked. We don't win on the handwriting, we win on the bank. Pierce's dry eyes had a spark in them now. Every dollar that left the charity fund left through the Albany Bank on an order bearing your seal, Mr. Carter. The bank keeps its own record dates, amounts, and crucially, who presented the order. The forger controlled the ledgers in this house. He did not control the bank's ledger 60 miles away. If the bank's record of the 11 disbursements matches Mrs. Carter's true book to the penny and the day, and contradicts the false one, then the false one is proven forged, and whoever presented those orders at the bank window is our thief. He folded his hands. I have written to the bank. I have requested the record and the teller's testimony. It should arrive Thursday, the day before quarter day. Should? Nathaniel repeated. Should. It is 60 miles, Mr. Carter, and there is a man in this county who has already cracked one skull to keep evidence from moving. I would not put it past him to trouble the road. Pierce did not soften it. If that record does not arrive by Friday morning, we walk into that accounting with 2 books in the same hand and no way to tell them apart. And the story that hangs together best is still the one that ruins you both. The table was quiet. Then Abigail spoke, and her voice was the calm, low one she used when other people were about to become dismissible if they weren't careful. Then we send someone we trust to the bank ourselves, not the post, a writer who won't be stopped and won't be bought. She looked at Nathaniel. You were a militia officer. You have men in this county who'd ride through fire on your word and not tell a soul. I do. Then send your best, tonight, not to wait for the bank to send its record, to carry it back himself in his own hands and let no man take it from him. She turned to Pierce. 2 riders, different roads. If one stopped, the other gets through. A thief can trouble one road. He can't watch two at once, not on 4 days' notice. Pierce looked at her over his spectacles for a long moment. "Mr. Carter," he said, "in 20 years of law, I have met perhaps 3 people who think like a strategist under pressure. Your wife is one of them. I trust you have noticed." "I've noticed," Nathaniel said quietly. "I noticed about 9 days too late." He sent the riders that night, 2 men from his old militia company brothers named Doyle, who asked no questions, and took 2 different roads north under the stars. And in the sending of them, something happened in the yard that neither Abigail nor Nathaniel expected. The servants came out. Not summoned. Just there. Hollis with flour on her apron. Susan with her chapped hands. The stable boys, the kitchen girl, who'd learned in 9 days several answers to questions she'd once had to ask. They came out into the dark and stood, and Hollis spoke for them, the way Corliss had spoken for the tenants. "We heard about Mr. Elias, ma'am." Hollis's voice was thick. "And we heard there's a false book made in your hand, and we come to say—" She looked at the others, and they nodded her on. "We come to say we'll swear to anything true that needs swearing. Every one of us. We watched you keep this house 7 years. We'll stand up in front of the whole county and say so if it'll help, won't we?" A murmur. "We will. We will, ma'am." Abigail, who had told herself in Albany that she would not give this house a single tear, found that a servant's loyalty was a different thing entirely from a husband's neglect, and that she had tears for the one that she'd never had for the other. "You don't have to do that," she said. "Standing up against the Langfords could cost you your places." "Our places?" Hollis laughed wet. "Ma'am, there ain't going to be any places if the master goes to prison and the estate's sold for scandal. We're not standing up to keep our places. We're standing up because you fed a fevered woman the last of the honey and never once let a soul in this house know how much you was carrying." She wiped her face. "A body remembers who carried them, even when the one at the top of the table forgets." Nathaniel stood at the edge of the lamplight, and he heard every word. And he understood that his servants had a loyalty to his wife that no wage he had ever paid had bought, and that he had lived 7 years in the middle of it and never seen it, the way he'd never seen the margins of the ledgers, the way he'd never seen her. "Hollis," he said, and his voice was not the militia officer's and not the master's. It was just a man's. "Thank you, all of you. He stopped, because the next true thing was hard to say in front of everyone. He said it anyway. "I owe every one of you an apology, as much as I owe her one. You kept this house running 9 days, on nothing but the memory of how she taught you. I never once learned your names. I mean to learn them now. Starting tonight. Starting with yours, if you'll tell me." Hollis blinked at him. In 7 years, the master of Carter Manor had never asked her name. "Hollis, sir," she said. "Margaret Hollis." "Margaret Hollis." He nodded slow, like a man learning a language late. "I won't forget it." Abigail watched this, and she did not soften. She had promised herself she wouldn't soften on one afternoon's worth of change, but she filed it away honestly in the true ledger of her heart under the column she'd almost given up keeping evidence he might yet learn. Naturally. Victoria came to her that night. Abigail was in her old rooms sorting the real ledger against Pierce's list, when the soft knock came, the same soft knock as 9 days before, and she said, "Come in," already knowing who it was, and Victoria came in and shut the door and stood with her hands folded, and this time there was no warm sunlight in her at all. She looked like a woman who had not slept. "You came back," Victoria said, "for 4 days, to keep an innocent name out of prison. Then I'll decide the rest." "Whose innocent name?" And there was something raw in the question, something that made Abigail set down her pen. "That depends on who forged a ledger in my hand and cracked an old man's head to plant it," Abigail said. "Doesn't it?" Victoria's face did a complicated thing, fear and shame, and something that might have been the first crack in a long performance. She crossed to the window and stood with her back to the room, and when she spoke, it was very low. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to believe I didn't know how far it would go." Her hands were white-knuckled. "I threw the match. At breakfast. A capable woman can always be replaced. I said it to please your husband, to make the rich man at the table feel like the reason the house ran. That's a thing I've done my whole life. Mrs. Carter make powerful men feel powerful, because a widow with no money and a brother drowning in debt learns early that a man's vanity is the only door that opens for her. She turned. I didn't know Nathaniel would agree. I didn't know it would send you out the door. And I swear before God I didn't know until Elias. I didn't know Richard would— Your brother. My brother. The word came out of her like a stone. Richard's the one, Mrs. Carter. The seal, the disbursements, the false book. He's been robbing the fund for 3 years to cover his debts a little at a time, always in summer when the accounting's loose. And when you found the 4 receipts when you raised it with Nathaniel— She pressed her hand to her mouth. He panicked. He needed the theft to land on someone. So he forged the book in your hand because you were leaving anyway, because a fled wife's the easiest story in the world to hang a crime on. And God help me, I made you the fled wife. I threw the match that sent you out the door and gave him exactly the villain he needed. I didn't plan it with him, but I built the door he walked through. The room was very still. Why are you telling me this? Abigail asked. Because Elias's head is cracked open at the parish, and that's murder if he dies, and I will not— Victoria's voice broke fully now, the performance gone, just a frightened woman under it. I've done a great many things to survive, Mrs. Carter. I've flattered fools and married a man I didn't love and told 1,000 small lies to keep a roof over my head. But I won't let an old man be murdered and a good woman hanged so my brother can pay his debts. There's a bottom even for me. I've just found it. She reached into her sleeve and drew out a folded paper. This is a note in Richard's hand to me 3 weeks ago, asking whether the household still kept the study key in the hall. His handwriting. His question. Proof he was planning to reach the seal before you ever found the 4 receipts. She set it on the desk. Use it, or use me. I'll stand up at the quarter day and say every word of this in front of the whole county and let it ruin me. Because being ruined and honest is a thing I've never tried, and I find I'd rather try it than the other. Oh boy, Gary. Abigail looked at the note. Then she looked at the woman who'd thrown the match, the woman she'd watched for a month, with the still careful attention of a woman watching weather, whose apology on the day she left had been against all Abigail's suspicion real. Sit down, Victoria, she said. We've 4 days and a great deal of work, and it seems I've been wrong about exactly one thing in all of this. What's that? I thought I was hunting one enemy in this house. Abigail pulled out a chair. It turns out I was only hunting one. The other one just changed sides. The Doyle brothers rode 2 roads north, and on the second night, one of the roads went wrong. The younger Doyle was stopped at the ford below Kinderhook by 3 men with no faces and a great deal of interest in his saddlebags. And they took the bags and beat him and left him in the reeds, and they rode off satisfied that they'd caught the courier and killed the evidence, and they had in fact caught a courier and torn open his bags, and found in them nothing but a decoy packet of blank parish paper that Pierce had made up precisely because he'd known one road would be watched. The real bank record was on the other road. In the other brother's coat, riding through the dark, past a ford. No one was watching, carried by a man who'd been told to trust no post and let no soul take it from his hands. It reached Carter Manor at dawn on Friday. Quarter day. 2 hours before the accounting. Pierce broke the bank's seal with hands that were for the first time not entirely steady, and he read it fast, then slow, and then he looked up at the 3 of them, Abigail, Nathaniel, and the widow who'd changed sides, and his dry voice cracked down the middle. 11 disbursements, he said. Dates and amounts. Every one matches Mrs. Carter's true book to the penny and the day. Every one contradicts the false book, which shows sums and dates that never touch the bank at all. He set the paper down, and the teller has written at the bottom in his own hand the description of the man who presented all 11 orders at the window over 3 years. He looked at Victoria and gentled because he was not a cruel man. A stout man, a merchant's coat, a ring with a merchant's mark, who signed the bank's book each time, not with your husband's name, Mr. Carter, and not with your wife's, with his own, because he never imagined anyone would ride 60 miles to read a teller's book. Pierce almost smiled. Richard Langford presented every order himself and signed for every one 3 years running in the one ledger he couldn't reach to forge. The room let out a breath it had been holding for 9 days. Nathaniel turned to his wife. He did not reach for her, he'd learned that much, but he looked at her the way 7 years ago she had once hoped he might and never had. "You did this," he said. "All of it. You kept a private book for 7 years that no one asked you to keep. You read what no one thought you were reading. You saw the trap before any of us. You even saw to send 2 riders on 2 roads." His voice was rough. "I told a room full of guests any educated woman could do your work. Abigail, there isn't a man in this county who could have done what you've done this week. There isn't a man in this state." "I know," Abigail said. "Not proud, just true. I've always known Nathaniel. That was never the thing I needed you to learn." She gathered the bank's record and her true book and Victoria's note into one neat stack, squaring the edges the way she squared everything. "We've an accounting to attend, and a thief who thinks he's already won, and a county full of people who came to watch a mad woman hang and are about to watch something else entirely." She stood. "The thing I needed you to learn was never that I was capable. It was that I was yours to lose, and you've learned it. I can see that you've learned it." She met his eyes. "Whether you've learned it in time to keep me, that's a different accounting. And it doesn't happen today." She walked to the door, the stack of truth in her 2 hands, the same hands that had held the house up for 7 years. "Come," she said to all of them. "Let's go tell the county who really robbed the widows. And let's do it in front of every soul who spent 9 days calling me mad, so that when it's done there won't be a person in Columbia County who doesn't know exactly whose 2 hands kept Carter Manor standing." And she went out into the summer morning to face the room they'd built to bury her, carrying the only weapon she'd ever needed, the one they'd all mistaken for housekeeping. The truth, written in her own hand, that no one had thought to read. The parish hall was full an hour before it needed to be, because the whole county had come to watch a woman hang, and a county that comes to watch a hanging arrives early for a good seat. They filled the benches and lined the walls and crowded the doorway. The Van Rensselaers and the Whitfields and the millmen and the tenant families and the widows themselves. The widows of the charity fund come to hear what had become of the money that fed them through the hard months, and every one of them had heard the same story passed hand to hand these 9 days, like a coin worn smooth, that Nathaniel Carter's wife had managed the accounts for years and something had gone wrong in the accounts, and she'd fled before it could be found. Some said mad, some said thief. All of them said guilty in the low, satisfied way a county says a thing about a woman it has decided to be done with. Richard Langford sat near the front, stout and easy in his merchant's coat, a leather folder on his knee. He had come to win. He had a forged book in a woman's hand, a seal that was not his own on every stolen dollar, and a story the whole county had already swallowed. He had cracked an old man's skull to keep the last loose thread from unraveling, and the old man was still senseless at the parish 2 doors down, unable to say a word. Richard had counted his cards, and he had counted them well, and he believed reasonably on the evidence he could see that he had already won. He did not know about the teller's book. The parish board sat at the long table at the head of the hall. 3 grave men with the fund's official ledger open before them, and the eldest of them, a churchwarden named Fisk, rapped the table, and the room fell to a hungry quiet. "We're gathered for the summer accounting of the parish charity fund," Fisk said. "It's no secret why the hall's so full. There's been talk. There's been more than talk. There's a charge to be answered that money's gone missing from this fund over 3 years, and that the hand behind it belongs to a member of this county." His eyes moved down the room. "Mrs. Carter, you've returned. You've been named in this. Will you answer?" Abigail rose. She had chosen where to stand. Not at the accused's place near the board, where they expected her head down, small, a woman waiting to be judged. She stood in the center aisle where the whole room could see her, the stack of truth in her 2 hands, and she let the silence stretch 1 beat 2, the way she'd learned a lowered voice makes men strain to hear. "I'll answer," she said, "but not the charge you think you've come to hear." A murmur ran the benches. You came to hear whether Abigail Carter robbed the widows of this parish." Her voice carried without rising. It was the calm, low voice, and the room leaned into it. "I'll save you the waiting." I did not. And before this morning's out, every soul in this hall is going to know exactly who did, and know it not on my word, but on paper none of you can argue with. She turned slowly so the turn took in the whole room. "You've spent 9 days deciding I was mad, or a thief, or both. I don't blame you. It's the easiest story. A woman leaves her husband's house, there must be a reason a county can understand. But I'd ask you to hold your verdict 1/2 hour longer than you've been holding it. Because I've spent 7 years reading what no one in this county thought worth reading, and this morning I mean to read it aloud." Richard Langford shifted in his seat. It was a small shift. Abigail saw it. So did Pierce, seated to the side with his dry hands folded, and so from the doorway where she stood pale and unsteady, did Victoria. Fisk frowned. "You've evidence, Mrs. Carter. I've 3 things, Warden, and I'll lay them down one at a time." Abigail stepped forward. "The first is a book. The parish board has been told a book exists in my hand recording these thefts. I understand a copy of such a book has been circulated." She let the word land. "I'd ask the board, has anyone brought that book before you? Has anyone offered to produce a ledger in my writing that shows my guilt?" The board looked at one another. And Richard Langford, who had planned to produce exactly that book at exactly the right moment, felt the ground tilt 1/2 degree beneath him, because she'd named his weapon before he could draw it, and a weapon named in the open is a weapon that must now be explained. "There's been mention of such a book," Fisk said carefully. "By whom?" "By whom?" Silence. Because the mention had come quietly through the same channels the rumor had through a word in the right ear through Whitfield to the Van Rensselaers, through the soft machinery Richard had built to make sure the county was ready to believe. No one could quite say who'd first mentioned it. That was how it had been built. "I'll tell the board why no one will name who mentioned it," Abigail said. "Because the book doesn't exist to be produced honestly. It exists to be found at the right moment by the right shocked person, so that no one would think to ask where it came from. I know this because I know something no one else in this hall knows." She lifted her chin. "I never wrote it." The murmur rose to something sharper. "I kept a private ledger for 7 years, a true one in my own hand, a copy of every account I managed, made by candle after the house slept." She held up the worn book. "This one. It has never left my keeping. It went with me to Albany, and it's 60 miles from the study, where a second book, a false one forged in my hand, was planted in a locked drawer for an honest man to find." Her voice hardened. "That honest man is Elias Warren, who has kept the estate's books 30 years and never cheated a soul. He found the false book believing it mine. He began to copy it to send to me, and someone came up behind him on the study stair and cracked his skull to take it back. And Elias Warren lies senseless at the parish this very morning, 2 doors from where you sit, because he read a book he was never meant to survive reading." The hall erupted. Elias was known. Elias was liked. A cracked skull was not a rumor a county could pass hand to hand like a smooth coin. It was blood, and blood changed the temperature of the room. Fisk rapped the table hard. "Order! Order! Mrs. Carter, these are grave claims. You say a book was forged in your hand. You say a man was struck. Can you prove either, or is this—" "I can prove both. That's my second thing." Abigail turned. "Mr. Samuel Pierce, attorney of Albany, holds the record of the bank that keeps this fund's money. I'd ask him to read it." Pierce rose dry and precise, and the room quieted for him, because a lawyer from Albany was a thing this county respected against its own instincts. "The parish charity fund is held at the Merchants' Bank of Albany," Pierce said. "Every dollar that leaves it leaves on a written order bearing the seal of the estate that administers the fund, Carter Manor. The bank keeps its own record, not the estate's ledger, which may be forged, not Mrs. Carter's ledger, which may be doubted. The bank's record kept 60 miles away by tellers with no stake in this county's quarrels." He lifted the paper. "I hold it here. It records 11 disbursements from this fund over 3 years, totaling $490. Not 4 as the estate's honest steward believed. 11. 7 of which never crossed the steward's desk at all, but went straight to the bank window under the estate's seal. He let that number sit in the room. 11. $490. The widows on the back benches had gone very still because $490 was winters of firewood. Was children's shoes, was the honey a fevered woman got before the great house got a sweet with its tea. Every one of these 11. Pierce went on, matches Mrs. Carter's private ledger to the penny in the day. Everyone contradicts the forged book, which lists sums and dates that never touch the bank at all, because the forger invented them at his desk and never dreamed anyone would ride to Albany to check them against the truth. He turned the page. But the bank's record does one thing more. The teller was required each time an order was presented to note who presented it and to take that person's signature. Not the name on the seal. The name of the living man who stood at the window and collected the money. The hall did not breathe. "I will read the teller's note," Pierce said, written in his own hand at the foot of the record. All 11 orders presented in person by the same gentleman. Stout, merchant's coat, a merchant's ring silver marked with a fouled anchor. Signed each receipt himself. Pierce looked up, and his dry eyes found the front bench. And the signature the teller took 11 times over 3 years in the one book the forger could not reach to alter. This is slander. Richard Langford was on his feet. His easy merchant smile was gone. His debtor's eyes had the wild edge of a man who feels a trap he cannot yet see the shape of. This is a desperate woman, and a hired lawyer inventing a teller 60 miles away who can say anything they've paid him to say. Where is this teller? Produce him. You can't hang a man on a paper and a signature you might have forged yourselves. The whole county knows this woman forges books. It's the very charge against her. It was a good throw. Abigail saw why he'd stayed alive so long, why he'd robbed for 3 years undiscovered. He was quick. He'd turned her own defense against her in a breath. The whole county knows this woman forges books, and half the benches wavered because half the benches had come believing exactly that. "A fair question," Pierce said mildly. "Where is the teller?" He did not look at Richard. He looked at the door. "Mr. Doyle, would you come in?" And the elder Doyle brother came through the crowded doorway, dusty from 60 miles, and behind him came a small nervous man in a clerk's black coat, who had never in his life stood before so many people and plainly wished he weren't now. "This is Mr. Amos Cole," Pierce said, "head teller of the Merchants' Bank of Albany." Mr. Doyle did not only carry the bank's record, he carried the man who wrote it. Because I have learned this week from Mrs. Carter that a wise person does not trust a road or a post or a paper that can be taken. One brings the living witness in one's own hands. He turned to the teller. "Mr. Cole, look about this room if you please. Take your time. Is the gentleman who presented those 11 orders present in this hall?" The little teller's eyes went round the room. Slow, terrified, honest. They passed over the board, over the widows, over Abigail, over Nathaniel standing at the side with his jaw set like a man watching a battle turn. They stopped on the front bench. "That's him," Amos Cole said, and pointed with a shaking hand at Richard Langford. "That's the gentleman. I'd know the ring anywhere, the fouled anchor. He always paid me a shilling to count it twice and never mind the extra. I thought him a generous man." His voice dropped. "That's him. He stood at my window 11 times. The hall came apart. It took Fisk a full minute to hammer the room back to order, and in that minute, Richard Langford made the mistake that finished him, because a cornered man who is quick is still a cornered man, and quickness without a floor beneath it is only a faster way to fall. "He's mistaken," Richard said too loud over the noise. "Or he's bought. I presented orders. Yes, of course I did. I handled the merchant contracts. I ran errands to the bank as a favor to Carter. Half the county's seen me do the estate's business. That proves nothing but that I was trusted." "You handled the merchant contracts," Abigail said. Something in the flatness of it cut through the noise. The room quieted to hear her. "You've just told this hall you ran the estate's bank errands as a favor to my husband." She stepped closer to the front bench, unhurried. "Then you'll be able to answer one question, Mr. Langford, and answer it easily in front of everyone, because a man who honestly ran an errand knows what was in his own hand." Her voice was very soft now, and the whole hall strained toward it. "When you carried those 11 orders to the bank, what did they say the money was for?" Richard opened his mouth, closed it. "It's a simple question. An honest errand runner would know. Each disbursement from a charity fund names its purpose. Widow's Relief, the parish school winter fuel. You presented 11. You signed for 11. So tell this hall which widow, which winter, which child's shoes did those $490 buy?" She let the silence bleed. "You can't name one. Because there was no widow, there was no school. There was only your debt. Mr. Langford, and a fund full of poor people's money, and a seal you could reach because the study key hung in the hall where any guest who'd learned the servants' names could find it. That's—" Richard's voice cracked. "That's speculation." "Is it?" And now Abigail turned to the doorway to the pale woman standing there with her hands white-knuckled. "Mrs. Langford, your brother says he ran honest errands. You've a letter in his hand that says otherwise. Will you read it to the board, or shall I?" The whole room turned to look at Victoria Langford, and Richard turned with them, and the look he gave his sister was the look of a man watching the last road out close. "Victoria." His voice was low and fast and full of everything command plea threat 3 years of a debtor's brother's grip. "Victoria, don't. Whatever they've promised you, they can't protect you. You're a Langford. You're in this as deep as I am. Every debt I paid with that money kept a roof over your head, too. You sit down and you say nothing, and we walk out of this together the way we've always. That's the trouble, Richard." Victoria's voice shook, and then halfway through it stopped shaking, as though she'd stepped off a ledge and found the falling easier than the standing at the edge. "We've always walked out of everything together. Every lie, every flattered fool, every roof I kept over our heads by making some rich man feel like the sun rose because he told it to. I threw the match at that breakfast table. For you, a capable woman can always be replaced. I said it to please a rich man, so his goodwill would keep flowing to us, and I watched it send an innocent woman out her own front door, and I told myself that was just how a Langford survives." She came forward into the hall, and every eye followed her. "But you cracked an old man's skull, Richard. Elias Warren, who never did you a day's harm, lying senseless 2 doors from this room. That's where I get off the road. That's the bottom even for me." She held up the folded note. "This is my brother's hand. 3 weeks before Mrs. Carter ever found the first receipt, he wrote to ask me whether the household still kept the study key in the hall so he could reach the seal. He was planning it before there was anything to plan against. He didn't panic and frame an innocent woman in a moment of fear." Her voice rang now clear and terrible. "He built it. Patiently. For months. And when I threw the match that sent Mrs. Carter out the door, I didn't start the fire. I only handed my brother the tinder he'd already been gathering." She set the note on the board's table before Fisk. "Read it. Read his hand against the teller's book. Read it all. I'm done being a Langford who walks out of the hall clean. I'll take whatever comes to me for the part I played. But I won't take it with him, and I won't take it for him, not one day more." Fisk took the note. He read it. He held it beside the bank's record, and his grave face went graver, and he passed it to the 2 board members beside him, and they read it too, and the room watched 3 churchwardens' faces confirm one after another that the 2 hands matched. Richard Langford looked around the hall and found not one face turned toward him in sympathy. Not the widows, not the tenants, not the Van Rensselaers who'd carried his story so willingly 9 days ago. Not his own sister. And the quick, easy merchant in him drained away all at once and left only the debtor, cornered with nothing quick left to say. But it was not the board's verdict that broke the room open. It was what Nathaniel did next. He had stood at the side through all of it silent, watching his wife dismantle a 3-year fraud with a private ledger and a teller and a sister's conscience, watching her do, in one morning in front of the whole county, the thing he'd told a breakfast table any educated woman could do. And when the note was read, and the room hung in the terrible pause before Fisk could speak, Nathaniel Carter walked into the center aisle, into the place where the whole county could see him, and he did the thing that no proud man of that county had ever done in that hall. He spoke against himself. "Warden, before the board rules, there's a thing this county needs to hear, and it needs to hear it from me." His voice was rough and level. "You've heard how the money was stolen. You've not heard how it was allowed. And I'll not let this end with only a Langford named, when the truth is, there were 2 men who failed the widows of this parish, and only one of them was a thief." The hall went silent in a wholly different way. 9 days ago, before any of this came to light, my wife brought me 4 of these receipts. Richard Langford's name on paper carrying my seal paper I never signed. She stood in my study and told me someone was stealing from this fund in my name. She begged me to read the ledgers. He did not look away from the room. He made himself hold it. And I told her it was shadows. I told her she was overreacting. I told her to calm herself and come home in a week. I refused to read the very books that would have caught this thief 3 years sooner, because a Langford was my guest, and my pride wouldn't stoop to suspect a man at my own table, on the word of— His voice caught, and he made himself finish it. On the word of a woman I'd just finished telling a room full of guests could be replaced. Someone on the benches drew a sharp breath. Some of them had been in that breakfast room. All of them had heard the story. That's the sentence, isn't it? That's the one the whole county's been whispering. Nathaniel's jaw worked. Any educated woman could perform Abigail's duties. I said it. At my own table. About the woman who'd kept my estate solvent. My tenants fed my name clean, and this very fund honest for 7 years, kept it honest in fact, right up until the morning I drove her out the door and gave a thief a clear road. He turned slowly until he faced her, Abigail standing in the center aisle, with the truth still in her 2 hands. I failed my wife before any Langford ever tried to deceive me. Richard Langford robbed the widows. But I'm the man who left the door open and called the woman who'd been guarding it useless, and I'll carry that in front of this county, because she carried worse than that in silence for 7 years, and never once let a soul see the weight. The hall was so quiet, the river could be heard through the walls. I don't say this to soften what's coming to Langford, Nathaniel said. Let the law have him whole. I say it because there's a widow in this room who lost her winter fuel to his thieving, and she deserves to know it wasn't for want of a warning. The warning was given. I was the fool who wouldn't hear it. And the only reason this fraud stands exposed today, instead of burying an innocent woman, is that Abigail Carter kept a book for 7 years that I never knew existed, protecting a household that never thanked her, run by a husband who told her she didn't matter. He looked at her, and his voice dropped to something the front benches barely caught. You were never the thing I could replace, Abigail. You were the thing holding all the rest of it up. I'd have known that 7 years ago if I'd ever once bothered to read the margins. Chick-a-day. Fisk let the moment stand because even a church warden knows when a room needs to feel a thing before it moves on. Then he rapped the table gently. The board finds no case against Mrs. Abigail Carter. The board finds she has at considerable risk to herself uncovered and proven a fraud against this fund that would otherwise have gone on undiscovered, and we owe her this parish's thanks, not its suspicion. He set his jaw. The board finds the evidence against Mr. Richard Langford overwhelming the bank's record, the teller's identification, and his own hand in a letter proving intent. The matter of the theft and the grievous assault upon Mr. Elias Warren passes now beyond this board to the county magistrate. Mr. Langford, you'll not leave this hall a free man. There's a constable at the door. There was. There had been since before the teller was called. Pierce had seen to it quietly, the way Abigail had taught them all that week to see to things quietly and in advance. Richard Langford was taken from the front bench, and the county he'd counted on to carry his story watched him go in a silence that was its own kind of verdict, and the widows on the back benches wept, some for relief, some for the money, some for the plain shock of watching the world turn out just this once to be fair. As for Victoria, she did not flinch from the constable's second look. I'll answer for my part, she said to Fisk before anyone had to ask. The letter's in your hand. I threw the match, and I'll not pretend I didn't. Whatever the law wants of me for it, I'm here. and Pierce, who was not a cruel man, murmured to the board that the woman had turned Crown's evidence of her own conscience unbought and unpromised, and that a court would want to weigh that, and it would in time, and it would go some way toward the smaller sentence a repentant witness earns. But that was for later. For that morning in that hall, the thing the county carried home was not the thief in the constable's grip. It was the picture of the richest man in the valley standing in the center aisle and naming his own failure louder than anyone had named the crime, and the woman he'd called replaceable standing across from him with the truth in her two hands, not yet forgiving him, not yet anything but seen at last by him and by all of them exactly as she'd been the whole time, and no one had troubled to look. The hall emptied slow. People do not hurry away from a thing they'll be telling for the rest of their lives. And when it was near empty, Nathaniel crossed to her. Not fast, not with the certainty of a man who believes a thing is his to keep, but slow the way she'd watched him learn to move all that terrible week. "You did it," he said. "You cleared your name. You cleared mine, though I'd done less than nothing to deserve it. The widows get their money back. Pierce says Langford's merchant stock will cover it, and what it doesn't, I'll cover myself every dollar." He stopped. His hands hung at his sides, empty, and she understood he was making himself not reach for her, and she understood what that cost him, and she filed it honestly in the true ledger of her heart. "It's done, Abigail. The thing that drove you out is finished. So I have to ask, and I've no right to, and I'll take whatever answer you give me." He drew a breath. "Will you come home?" Abigail looked at him a long moment. At the man who'd stood in the center aisle and spoken against himself in front of the whole county. At the man who'd learned Margaret Hollis's name at last. At the man who'd read the ledgers finally and seen her in every margin. "The thing that drove me out isn't the thief, Nathaniel," she said gently, and it was the gentleness that told him the answer before her words did. "The thief only proved I was right to have kept my own book. The thing that drove me out was 7 years of being useful to a man who never once saw me. And you've done a great deal this week to see me. I'll not pretend you haven't." She gathered her true ledger and Pierce's record and squared their edges. But one morning's courage in a parish hall isn't 7 years mended. I've watched men be sorry before. Sorry's easy when the house is cold and the truth's just walked in wearing your wife's face. She met his eyes, and there was no cruelty in it, only a woman who had finally learned the price of her own worth and did not intend to sell it back cheap. "You asked me to come home. I heard you. That's more than you've ever heard me, so it's a beginning. But I'll not come home because you asked, the way I did everything for 7 years because you told me to." She stepped past him toward the door and the summer light. "If you want me back under your roof, Nathaniel Carter, you'll not command it, and you'll not beg it. You'll earn it. One honest day at a time, and you'll do it knowing I might never come and stay honest anyway, because it's right, and not because it works." At the threshold, she paused and did not look back. "That's the accounting that matters now, and it doesn't get settled today." She did not come home that week nor the next, and Nathaniel Carter did the hardest thing a proud man can do, which was to let her stay away and get honest anyway. He began with the names. He'd told the parish hall he meant to learn them, and a lesser man would have let that promise die the moment the crowd went home. Nathaniel did not. The morning after the accounting, he came down to a kitchen that had grown used to his absence, and he stood in the doorway until Hollis noticed him and near dropped her pot. "Sir, did you need something I can send it up? I came down to ask you something, Margaret Hollis." He said the whole name careful, the way a man says a word in a language he's decided to learn late. "Not to be waited on. I came to ask how the house is run, the real running of it, the part I never saw." Hollis looked at him like he'd sprouted a second head. "The running of it, sir. The bread, the wages, the tenants. The thing my wife did every morning before the rest of us woke that I called discipline and took the credit for at my own table." His jaw worked. "I don't know how any of it's done. I've owned this estate my whole life, and I couldn't tell you which Dutchman does honest fence work and which one cheats." She knew. "You know, I mean to learn it. And I'd take it as a kindness if you'd teach me, and not spare my pride while you're at it. Because my pride is exactly the thing that drove her out, and I've no more use for it." There was a long silence in the kitchen. Then Hollis set down her pot. "Well," she said, "you'd best sit down then, sir. It's a long list and you're starting 7 years behind." He sat down at the kitchen table, the master of Carter Manor sitting at the servants' table with flour dust on the boards, and he listened and he wrote things down in his own hand in a plain book he'd bought for the purpose. And when he got something wrong, Hollis told him he'd gotten it wrong because he'd asked her to, and because a woman who'd fed a fevered tenant the last of the honey had never much feared a rich man's frown. Word of it got round. It always does. Doubt. Abigail heard it in Albany through the letters that came now. Not one honest letter, and then silence, but a letter every few days, and never once a summons. He did not write "come home." He'd learned that much. He wrote instead the plainest, most ordinary things, and it was the ordinariness of them that got past the wall she'd built. The pool woman's fever's long gone, but the youngest took a chill this week. Hollis sent broth and the good bread not the day old. I asked her how she knew to send the good bread, and she said, "You taught her a sick child gets the good bread before this house gets a sweet with its tea." I did not know that was a rule. I know it now. I've written it in my book. Another. I met the honest Dutchman today. His name is Vanderhoof. His brother is the one who cheats. You'll be pleased to hear I can now tell them apart, though it took Corliss 3 tries to keep me from hiring the wrong one. The south fence is mended. Properly this time. I stood and watched the whole of it, so I'd know how a fence is meant to be hung. It is more work than I ever imagined, and I imagined none of it, which was rather the trouble. And once, only once, a line that was not ordinary at all, tucked at the bottom of a page about the mill accounts, Elias woke Tuesday. He knew me. First thing he asked was whether you were cleared. I told him you'd cleared us both, and that I'd told the whole county I was the fool who wouldn't hear you. He laughed, which the doctor says is a good sign, and then he said, "About time, sir," which I deserved, and which I've also written in my book. Abigail read that one 3 times, and her Aunt Ellen, drying a cup, watched her do it. "He's changed," Ellen said. It wasn't quite a question. "He's changing." Abigail set the letter down. There's a difference. A man can change for a week because the house is cold, changing for a month when the house is warm again and the crisis is past, and I've given him no promise, that's a different animal. She was quiet. He learned the Dutchman's name, Aunt Ellen. That's not for me. There's no way for that to be a performance for me. I'm not there to see it. He learned it because a fence needed hanging, and he'd finally understood that knowing which man to hire is the actual work, and that the actual work was mine for 7 years. She pressed her hand flat on the letter. That's the thing I can't dismiss. He's doing the work whether I come home or not. He's doing it in case I never come home. That's what I asked for. That's the exact thing I asked for, and now he's doing it, and I don't know what to do with a man who's finally done the exact thing I asked. You could go and see for yourself, Ellen said mildly. Not to stay, to see. She went at the end of the summer to see. She wrote, first she'd not ambush him. That wasn't the point, and his reply was 3 lines and no pleading, which she noted and approved. Come whenever you like. Stay as long or as short as you please. The house is yours to walk through, and no one will ask you a single thing you don't wish to answer. Least of all me. She came up the river road, and the house that had been dying in July stood sound. In September the fence mended the well, drawing sweet, the shutters hung true, the yard swept. But it was not the mended fence that stopped her breath. It was that the house was breathing wrong. Not dying wrong as it had been. Breathing to a rhythm that was almost hers, but not quite the rhythm of people who'd learned her ways by heart and were keeping them faithfully, without the woman who'd made them. Hollis met her in the yard and burst into tears, and had to be told twice that Abigail hadn't come home for good only to see, and even then, Hollis held her by both flowery hands and said, Come and see what he's done, ma'am. You'll not believe it. He sits at my table of a morning and writes in a little book and gets things wrong and lets me tell him so. The master lets a cook correct him and thanks her for it. I've been in service 40 years, and I never. Nathaniel was in the study when she found him, and he was doing the thing that undid the last of her guard entirely, though she'd sworn nothing would. He was reading the ledgers, not once guiltily in the dark of a crisis. As a habit. There was a lamp lit, though it was afternoon, and the estate books open, and his plain learning book beside them, and his own notes in his own hand in the margins now clumsy. Half of them wrong, some of them crossed out where Elias had gently corrected him. But there. A man reading the margins at last. A man who'd finally understood that the margins were where the whole estate had always actually lived. He looked up and saw her and stood and did not come around the desk. Abigail. Her name still like it cost him something and always would. You came to see. I came to see. Then see whatever you like. Ask anyone anything. They'll tell you the truth I've asked them to, and I've made it safe for them to. He gestured at the books, and there was no pride in it, only a kind of tired honesty. It's all here. What I've learned. What I've gotten wrong. Elias has been fixing my mistakes from his sickbed, and enjoying it more than the doctor thinks is decent. I'm still 7 years behind. I expect I always will be. But I read it now, every day, whether you come home or not. He met her eyes. That last part matters most, so I'll say it plain. I'm not doing this to win you back. I started that way, I'll not lie to you. But somewhere this summer, it stopped being for you, and started being right, and I found I'd rather be a man who does the work because it's right, than a man who does it because it works. You taught me that in the hall, though you may not have meant to. You said, stay honest, even knowing I might never come. So I have. I will. Abigail stood in the doorway of the study, where a false book had once been planted, where an honest man's skull had been cracked, where a marriage had first begun to die over 4 unaccounted receipts, and she felt the thing she'd guarded against all summer finally give. I believe you, she said. That's the frightening part, Nathaniel. I've spent all summer building reasons not to believe you, and you've spent all summer quietly taking them apart, not by asking me to, but by learning a Dutchman's name and a cook's name, and how a fence is hung when I wasn't there to be impressed. There's no performing that. A man doesn't learn to hang a fence to fool a woman 60 miles away. She stepped into the room. I believe you've changed. I'm just not yet sure I can live inside the belief. Then don't yet. He said it fast before she could. Stay in the village. Stay with Ellen. Stay in the guest room at the far end of the house, or come and go as you please, and let me court you the way I never did the first time. I never courted you, Abigail. Did you know that our fathers arranged it, and I thought a good arrangement was the same as a good marriage, and I spent 7 years being a good arrangement and calling it love. His voice roughened. Let me do the part I skipped. Let me earn a conversation. Let me earn a morning. Let me earn my way back to the place beside you one honest day at a time, and if it takes the rest of my life, I'll count the life well spent. She did not answer that day. She stayed in the guest room at the far end of the house, and she watched. What she watched over the weeks that followed was a man courting his own wife with the patience of a man who has finally understood he deserves nothing and must earn everything. He did not command. Once out of 7 years' habit, he started to, Abigail, see that the, and caught himself mid-sentence, and stopped and started over. Abigail, would you be willing to look at the mill contract? I've read it 3 times, and I think Vanderhoof's brother has slipped something past me, and you'd catch it in a breath. And she caught it in a breath, and he thanked her, and he did not take the credit at supper. And when Whitfield came again about the river contracts and said, your books are a marvel. Carter, how do you do it? Nathaniel. Carter said in front of the whole table. I don't. My wife does. She's the finest estate manager in this valley, and I was a fool who called it housekeeping for 7 years. You're eating tonight because of her hand, not mine. Abigail set down her cup, at that the same cup, the same table, and this time there was no napkin folded into a neat square, no walking out into the summer. This time she looked at him a long moment, and Nathaniel looked back and did not flinch from what he'd said. And around the table the guests shifted unsure, because it was not a thing men said, and Nathaniel Carter had just said it as though it were the plainest fact in the world. Which it was. He'd only just learned to say plain facts out loud. Victoria's trial came and went that autumn. She stood up in the magistrate's court and told the whole of it, her part and her brother's, and asked for no mercy she hadn't earned. And the court, weighing an unbought confession against a match thrown in vanity, gave her a fine and a term of good behavior, and let her keep her freedom. She left the county after. She wrote Abigail one letter from Philadelphia, where she'd taken honest work as a bookkeeper for a merchant house. The one skill my late husband said I hadn't the head for. It turns out I had it all along. I only needed to stop spending it on flattering men. Abigail wrote back and kept writing, because a woman who finds the bottom and climbs back up from it is a rarer thing than a woman who never fell. And Abigail had learned that summer not to waste rare things. Richard Langford went to prison. The widows got their money back, every dollar Langford's merchant stock and Nathaniel's own purse together, and the parish school got its shoes and its candles, and the pool woman's youngest got through the autumn chill on the good bread, not the day-old. And none of it was a rumor the county passed hand to hand anymore. It was simply how things were done at Carter Manor. And everyone knew whose hand had made it so, because Nathaniel would not let a supper go by without saying it. Elias recovered enough to keep the books again, though slower, and he trained the kitchen girl who'd once asked questions she didn't know the answers to, so that the estate would never again rest on one person's memory. That had been Abigail's idea, sent by letter, and Nathaniel had done it the day he read it. Never one hand holding the beam up again. Never one person's silence keeping 40 souls fed. The morning she came home for good, no one planned it, which is how she knew it was real. She'd stayed in the guest room 3 months by then, coming and going, watching, and one September morning she woke before dawn out of the old habit and lay in the strange bed listening to the house breathe, and it was breathing right. Not almost hers. Right. Because she'd been there quietly setting it right for 3 months without quite admitting she was doing it, and the house had a mistress again, whether or not she'd put her ring back on, and she lay there and understood that she'd already come home. She'd only been waiting to notice. She came down the back stair into the kitchen and stopped in the doorway. Nathaniel was there, at the hearth. Alone, the fire coaxed clumsy, but coaxed a pot on the hook, making breakfast with his own 2 hands badly from the smell of it. The tea oversteeped and the eggs going wrong, and he had not heard her, and she watched the richest landowner in the valley burn his own breakfast in a kitchen he'd once never entered, and she understood he did it every morning. Not for her to see. She wasn't meant to see it. He did it because he'd asked Hollis to sleep the extra hour these 3 months, because the woman had risen before dawn for 40 years, and he'd decided she'd earned the rest, and he made his own breakfast badly, rather than wake her. There was no performing that either. He hadn't known she was there. "You'll want to take the pot off," Abigail said quietly. "The tea's past saving." He turned startled, and something crossed his face. Not the master's face, not the militia officer's. Just a man caught being kind with no one watching, and he took the pot off and looked at the ruin of the eggs and laughed low and rueful. "I can hang a fence now," he said. "I can read a ledger and tell one Dutchman from another, and I know every name in this house. I still can't make a decent pot of tea to save my life." "No," Abigail agreed. "You can't." She crossed to the hearth and took the pot from his hand and did not push him aside, only stood beside him the way she'd asked to stand beside him for 7 years and never been let. "But you got up before the cook so she could sleep, and you didn't tell anyone you were doing it, and you'd have gone on doing it whether I ever came down that stair or not." She looked at the burned eggs and the ruined tea and the fire he'd built with his own clumsy hands. "That's the whole of it, isn't it? That's the thing I walked out to find and couldn't get from you for 7 years. Not that you could do my work, that you'd do the small, unseen, thankless work, and do it when no one was watching and expect no credit, and go on doing it in the dark before dawn, because it was right and not because it won you anything." She reached into her pocket. The wedding ring was there, It had been there all summer and all autumn. She'd carried it, not worn it, and she'd told herself she carried it out of habit, and she'd known that was a lie. She held it in her palm a moment, and Nathaniel saw it, and went very still, and did not reach for it, and did not beg, and that stillness, that hard-won 3-month stillness, was the last thing she needed to see. "I'm not putting this back on because I've forgotten," she said. Her voice did not shake. "I'll never forget that morning at the table. I'll never forget 7 years of being useful to a man who couldn't see me. That doesn't go away because you learned a Dutchman's name. I'll carry it the rest of my life, and so will you, and that's as it should be." She slid the ring onto her finger herself, without his help, the way she'd walked out of this house without his permission. "I'm putting it back on because your actions have finally matched your words. Every day for months with me gone and nothing promised. That's not sorry. Sorry's easy. This is changed, and I've watched you long enough to know the difference." Nathaniel looked at the ring on her finger, and then at her, and for a moment, the man who'd never learned to weep came the closest he ever would. "May I spend the rest of my life earning the place beside you?" he asked. Not commanding, not begging, asking plain the way he'd learned to ask for a conversation and a morning and a cook's name. Knowing I'll never fully earn it and doing it anyway because it's right. Abigail Carter picked up the ruined pot of tea and handed him a fresh one to start over, and stood beside him at the hearth of the house she'd held up alone for 7 years, and had now chosen freely on her own terms, seen at last for exactly what she was to hold up with him. "You may," she said. "Now watch how the tea is made. You've a great deal left to learn, and I intend to be here to teach you every bit of it." And she was. For the rest of both their lives, in a house that never again mistook the woman who kept it alive for a tool that could be replaced. Abigail Carter was never once invisible again.